Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's workshop, Capturing Production Sound from the Center for Creativity. My name is Chad Brown. I'm one of the assistants at the Center for Creativity at Pitt. And tonight we're going to explore all sorts of sound and sound making and how you can set up a home studio and record at home. I know we're all still kind of stuck at home for the most part. Certainly not going into any recording studios right now, but that doesn't mean you can't record good sound. So we're going to dive into all of that tonight. I'm going to share my PowerPoint and let's have at it. All right, so again, welcome to Capturing Production Sound. This is going to be a pretty brief, I won't say brief because I'm going to talk a lot, but it's going to be an entry-level introduction to, as I say here, tools, techniques for sound recording. Obviously, this is something people spend their entire lives studying, and I'm not going to cover everything tonight, but hopefully enough of a crash course to get you started, whether or not you have any experience in sound recording. Before I came to the Center for Creativity, I did my undergrad in film production in Virginia and focused a lot in the sound department, in the production sound department. So a lot of, I was the guy holding the boom pole, miking up actors, all that kind of thing. And then afterwards, I moved into theater and live events in a freelance capacity. So got some experience with live sound reinforcement in that way. But a lot of this that we're going to talk about tonight can be applied to all of those fields and more, including podcasting, voiceover work, these kind of things. So even Zoom calls, how to get better Zoom audio. So let's go ahead. I want to shout out one of our spokes at the Center for Creativity, the Pittsburgh Lens, which is a home for all of our media-related programming and events, including the 1 Minute Film Festival and the ongoing Pitch Storytelling Initiative. You can find more of our workshops and events as they are posted on our website, creative.pitt.edu, and look for the Pittsburgh Lens. All right, I've got this crazy bar at the bottom of my screen that's blocking my PowerPoint. Tonight's objectives, we're going to discuss some basic gear and techniques, including microphones, recorders. We're going to talk about mic placement, file formats, digital audio recording, and also setting up your home studio. And then I'm going to show you my ad hoc home studio that I have set up here in my new apartment. I'm going to answer all of your questions, and then hopefully I'll answer all of your questions. And then at the end, time permitting, we're going to play around with some Foley, which is a technique of recording sound effects after filming has been completed, usually in a studio. So footsteps, doors opening and closing, all these kind of, and more. All the sound effects that you hear in a movie are not usually recorded on location, but after the fact. So we're going to play around with a little bit of that. It's really fun. I'm going to show a short film, a Buster Keaton short film, if anyone's familiar, and we're going to add in our own sounds. All right, so first, we're going to talk about sound treatments, how to make a room sound better, both for your recorder and for you. Soundproofing is keeping outside sounds out and stopping the transmission of sound energy through walls, through doors, through windows, and also keep it from bouncing around inside the space. So it's just a collection of techniques to control sound. A little bit technical. This will get a little technical later on, but for now, just keep in mind that sound waves are waves and they move like ripples in water. Okay, so that energy is rippling out and bouncing off of surfaces and scattering around. So to mitigate that, we use two techniques, diffusion and absorption. And I'm going to go into that in more specifics. I should also mention before we go on any further, if you have questions along the way, leave them in the chat. My co-host Mike is on the line and he'll relay those to me if I don't see your chat come up. But please, any and all questions that you have as we go along, I'm happy to answer all of those. So diffusion and absorption. This is a little graphic that is showing a room with no sound treatment, and it's obviously very simplified. You can see the speakers in the corner there and the yellow headphones in the middle. Imagine that's you. Without any sound reinforcement is what it's called. That sound is just going to bounce those red arrows and bounce back to you. And also the blue arrows in the front are going to come directly to you. So what's going to happen there is the sound is what is going to become what's called out of phase. You're going to hear sound from the speakers, and then you're also going to hear the reverb, the echo of the sound bouncing off the wall and coming back to you a little bit slower. Sound moves very fast, but depending on the size of the room, that echo could be really noisy and crazy, and you don't want that. So what we do with things like, I should go back to the last slide and show you, what we do with things like foam, this is egg crate foam, or you can see these wooden blocks cut in weird angles, is again, absorbing that energy so it doesn't bounce back, or diffusing it so it scatters completely and loses its energy and doesn't make it all the way back to us. All right, so here is a diagram, simple diagram showing diffusion and absorption. Obviously, again, the arrows are the direction of the energy. In the left side here, absorption. You can imagine this spongy looking thing is a big, thick chunk of really dense foam that lets the sound energy into it. It's a porous material, so the energy is going into it, but then bouncing around inside and not really retaining enough energy to come back out and reflect back to you. As you can see in the right, diffusion is not, there's no material taking in the sound energy. So these triangles are like those hard wooden blocks that we saw in the last slide, are just, when the sound energy hits it at weird angles, it's just gonna scatter and lose all of its energy, and you can see not make it back to the listener. So those are your two basic sound treatments. Now the eggshell or the egg crate foam that you see commonly that has, the little points of foam, that might look like diffusion, but it's actually absorption. So that foam, being a porous material, is not going to reflect too much sound energy. It will reflect a little bit, but really it's foam, like I said, taking in the energy, and then the sound energy bounces around inside the little holes in the foam and loses its power that way. So both of these techniques are often used together. One technique is usually not going to cancel out all that sound energy. So it's best when you have them both together.
So someone in the chat asked, hold on, let me bring that up real quick here. What if you wanted to maximize sound reverberation?
What if you wanted to maximize, oh, I see it. Yeah, what if you wanted to maximize reverberations? Right, that's a good point. Sound reinforcement is about controlling sound. So if you do want some reverberation and some echo, these techniques can still be used to cancel out the noise. When sound energy is random and it's muddying up our, what the listener is hearing, that's noise. So you can use these techniques to control where the sound is bouncing back from. And I have an example later that I'll be sure to bring up this point again. So you can control the reverb and the echo. If you think about, some fancy recording studio, it's a big room and they'll have, carpets on the floor, sound treatments on the walls and things, but that studio, that room has its own character, and that can be manipulated by sound engineers to make, say a band sound different in that studio than they would somewhere else. And that's the big draw for that studio. So sound can be controlled. Okay, so here's a picture of a recording studio that I don't know. I just found on the internet, but this is a good way to find the sound treatments. So y'all can shout them out or put them in the chat if you see anything in this room that to you looks like a sound treatment, something that the sound engineer put in place to control that sound. And there are quite a few. All right, the tiles on the ceiling and the rug. Yes and yes. Yeah, the rug, definitely. Curtain, the wooden boards. Tape on the drum head. All right, Eric, yes. Corner stands, okay. So yeah, you're picking up on a lot of them for sure. So yeah, it's interesting to think about, if this room was meant to be completely dead, why would they put hardwood flooring in? So that's an example of there's going to be some sound energy bouncing off that floor, but that rug is going to stop a lot of the errant things that you don't want. All right, yeah, the drum bass sound for the carpet, ceiling tiles, yeah. All right, so you're getting a lot of the big ones. Now for the big reveal, all of them. And I will say, tape on the drum head, that's good. I'm not a drummer, so I didn't pick up on that one, but yeah, drummers do use a lot of different treatments to modify the sound of their kit. So a lot of people pointed out the panels on the ceiling. Yep, those are acoustic panels. You often see them covered in something like burlap. That is a very porous material, but doesn't look gross. And on the other side, you have that super high density foam that's going to absorb your reflections. In the corners, those drum walls kind of do the same thing, but those could be moved out around the drum kit to isolate it from the rest of the band. The carpeted drum riser, again, the carpet stops footsteps and it breaks up the sound energy from transferring down through the floor. Also having the drum up on a riser separates it from the floor, so that vibration energy isn't gonna go out through the whole room. The rug, obviously, the drapes in the corners, these look pretty thin, but like often heavy curtains, heavy drapes do a great job. And then the stacks of guitar amps and bass amps on the side here, those are obviously being used, but that extra mass and irregular shape is going to help absorb energy and break it up, and keep it from just coming back, one to one, if you will. So you can see, even in a simple studio like this, there's a lot going on to modify the sound. Let's see, did I get everything there? I think so. Okay. So here's another example from the Wolf Trap Amphitheater, the Feline Center. This is in Vienna, Virginia. And if you haven't been to Wolf Trap, it's a really great venue. It's the only national park dedicated to the performing arts. And so they do, concerts here. They have an opera series. And I want to say that for the opera series they do in the summer, they don't even mic the opera singers, and they just rely on that projection and then the shape of the space to project the voices through this rather large venue. So you can see up in the top left corner, that's the sound booth. And then down on the lower right side is where the stage would be. So this whole amphitheater is shaped like a giant cone to project the sound out to the lawn seats all the way in the back. You can imagine it's like sitting in one of those, in like a big, megaphone that like the cheer squad has at a football game, or like a Victrola speaker horn on an old like hand crank turntable. The shape, you can see this whole thing is wooden. It's beautiful uh, Douglas fir and pine wood. But those geometric shapes are all very intentional to control how the sound is projecting, but also not reflecting back to the stage. So you can see like the wooden pillars on the back side here. The angle that the sound is going to be hitting those is going to project it out into the audience and away from the stage. So it's going to sound really good out in the crowd, but it's not going to distract the performers with a bunch of unnecessary reverb. And these giant hexagonal panels up here, I believe, are some sound deadening panels as well, right above the stage. So that's Wolf Trap. All right, if there's no questions, we're gonna go right into microphones and talk about the two basic types of microphones, which are dynamic and condenser. Dynamic mics are better suited to live performance, and they're what you're gonna see in a live performance setting. This picture here is of two super common ones, the Shure SM58 and the SM57. The lower one is the 57, and that's kind of an instrument mic. The top one, the SM58, is the most ubiquitous vocal mic that you'll ever see. So these microphones work with electromagnetism inside the microphone itself. So they're very robust and they're better suited to extreme changes in loudness. So, you know, a singer really belting out into the microphone is not going to damage any of the elements inside. They're going to get thrown into a roadie case and taken to the next city, really abused. So these mics are very robust, but they're not as sensitive as condenser microphones, and that's why they're used in live performance, but not so much in a studio setting, especially for things like Foley or voiceover work, these kind of things. Condensers, as I say here, are seen more in recording studios. They have a higher sensitivity, but are much more fragile. All of the ones that you're seeing here are large diaphragm condensers, LDC microphones, and that just means the diaphragm, which is the element inside that vibrates in reaction to the sound energy and then converts that into an electrical signal, is larger and thus more sensitive. They're able to capture more sonic information because of the smaller diaphragm as opposed to the dynamic mic, which is a big, electromagnetic piece that has to move back and forth between the coils of wire. So the distance that diaphragm has to move to actually register information is a lot lower in condenser microphones, and that's another reason they're higher sensitivity. The housing, the shapes of these is varied. So dynamic and condenser mics include a lot of different types of microphones. These are just the basic technologies. Other technologies are like ribbon microphones or piezo pickups that just operate a little bit differently, and they're not as common. They're more specialist kind of microphones. And then there's, like I said, the different use types. Obviously, shotgun microphones, lavalier or lapel mics, and then specific use microphones like you can get a kit of drum mics and these kind of things. Hydrophones for recording underwater, super parabolic mics that you'd see at a sporting event. But these all use the same basic technologies of dynamic or condenser. I'll briefly talk about USB microphones because they're not a specific type of microphone, but rather, the microphone itself has the analog to digital converter inside of it rather than being inside of like a digital recorder. So it's converting it to digital in the microphone sending that digital signal to your computer, rather than relying on the converter within a recorder. So the Pro is obviously you can plug and play. It's less equipment, one less piece if you don't have to have a recorder. Some smartphones can even take them. The con, I think, in my opinion, in my experience, they're lower quality than the dedicated circuits within a real mixer. Obviously, it's a purpose-built professional piece of equipment that's going to be a little bit better than the little tiny converter that's inside of a USB microphone. And I also think they limit you because you can't upgrade to use a recorder. So if you're going into the field, say on a film set, you are not going to be running around holding your laptop that has your microphone plugged into it. You're going to want a field recorder. And because of that USB connection, you can't really upgrade. Some of them have combination XLR and USB, but they kind of limit you. So depending on what you want to do, USB microphones can be, helpful or a hindrance. Microphones have different polar patterns. So in this diagram, you can imagine the microphone being in the center of that polar graph. I'll say different condenser microphones, although they might look the same, will have very different polar patterns. So omnidirectional, it's recording sound in every direction, 360, all equally. You see that a lot in like lavalier microphones. Figure eight, obviously those two bubbles are kind of where the best sound is being recorded. And then over here on these axes, the sound is being rejected or not heard as much. Cardioid, that's a term that refers to the shape, which is kind of a heart shape, cardiology, same root. You can see those as well as supercardioid and hypercardioid are picking up from the front, but rejecting all the sound behind you. So that's really helpful, again, for controlling what your microphone is hearing. And then low bar / shotgun, that's what you're going to see in shotgun microphones. You'll also see super and hypercardioids in shotgun microphones from time to time, but they're just very narrow in the sound that they're actually picking up and rejecting it all on the sides. So you can really focus on what you're hearing, or what the microphone is hearing more specifically. Any questions about microphones before we go into recorders and mixers? And make sure I said everything I wanted to say about microphones as well. Yeah, vocal microphones are one of those three cardioid shapes. So you can imagine the microphone pointed at a singer. You don't want to hear the guy standing over there. You just want to hear the singer. So it's going to reject the sound behind the microphone and only focus right there. Some LDCs, large diaphragm condenser microphones in the studio, have the ability to switch between like a figure eight pattern and a cardioid pattern, which can be helpful just depending on what the sound engineer is trying to capture. All right, let's go into recorders. Before I go any further, Mike, can I get a time check? I really should have brought my watch up here.
It is 6:30.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to talk about mixers and recorders now. So strictly speaking, a mixer and a recorder are two separate pieces of equipment. But especially in like film production, they're just called mixers. You can see like this third image down here, this top bit is the actual mixing console, if you will, and the lower bit is the recorder. A mixer that you would see in like a live setting is going to be, a big tabletop thing with the fader knobs. That's going to go, and that is going to send sound back to speakers, or it can go out to a separate recorder. So it's useful to think about these things being separate, although they're often lumped together. And recorders like these two up here, and even this lower one, have some rough mixing ability. A dedicated mixer, it just gives you a lot more control. So on the left here, these two, the Tascam and the Zoom Handy Recorder, these are just little handheld recorders with built-in microphones, also have inputs. Those are super common, great for starting out. You have 2 tracks coming in, sometimes 4. Then you can perhaps upgrade to something like the Marantz recorder over here that you can see has a little shoe mount to screw it onto the bottom of your camera, so you can really be a one-person setup. And then professional gear like this Sound Devices 788T on the bottom is kind of as good as it gets, and that device right there is probably well over $1,000. But it has eight inputs and just better circuitry and this kind of thing. So when you're choosing your mixer and recorder, you definitely want to think about inputs. So think about the kind of microphones that you're using and what kind of situations you're going to be recording in. A DJ is going to have much different recording needs than a production engineer on a film set. So Pro Gear usually uses XLR inputs. That's that first picture with the 3 pins, but often you'll see 1/4 inch as well. I don't have any notes on this slide. So you'll see both of those. 1/4 inch is not as, I'll say XLR is preferred over 1/4 inch because it snaps into the input and locks in place and you can't accidentally pull it out. Consumer gear is often going to have those RCA jacks, the red and the white stereo cables like that. And that's not, that's for your home stereo, really. On a dedicated mixer, sometimes you'll see RCA as a record out output. And that's, that's all right. And then that last picture is just a combination jack that you can plug either a 1/4 inch or an XLR into. And for XLR and 1/4 inch inputs, you want to look for the capability of your recorder to record phantom power, which is electricity that's sent down the cable to your microphone and actually powers your microphone, so it doesn't have to have a battery built in. That's less common in consumer gear, but it's really nice to have, especially for things like those dynamic microphones that need a lot of power to get the magnets going. So that's definitely something you want to look for. You can see I should mention tip ring sleeve and tip sleeve. These are different styles of 1/4 inch. You can see the ring there. A TS is an instrument cable, and a TRS is an audio cable. And then you'll also see TRRS, ring sleeve, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, you want to look at your circuitry, which I'm just going to briefly touch on balanced and unbalanced circuits because they're very complicated, but what you should know is that balanced is better than unbalanced. A balanced circuit on that third wire, the XLR has 3 pins or 3 wires in the cable. The TRS has 3. It's basically sending a hot signal with the sound and a cold negative signal that is the opposite. And when it gets to the recorder, those cancel each other out and it just becomes one wave, as you can see in the image here. And that helps to cancel out any noise that's introduced into the electrical circuit, because these cables are transmitting electricity. They're not transmitting sound waves. So feedback from extension cords or even RF signals, radio frequencies in the air, can add noise into your unbalanced circuit, especially if it's a very long cable run, or the cable is damaged in some way. So balanced is a lot better for canceling out that noise. I'll briefly say that in one theater I worked at, I was working late at night and we had a damaged, unbalanced speaker cable. And all of a sudden I started hearing all these voices singing and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I thought I was alone in the theater and I was really freaked out. And then I realized that that damaged cable was actually picking up the gospel radio station from in the city. So I was actually hearing a choir singing being picked up by that damaged cable as if it was a giant antenna. So a balanced cable would have canceled that out a lot better. In your digital recorders, we should briefly touch on sample rate and bit depth. Sample rate is just the number of samples of audio that are taken per second, and that's expressed in hertz or kilohertz. And bit depth is the number of possible amplitude values that your digital equipment can capture. And I have a cheat sheet there for CD quality, which is standard 41 or 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit audio, all the way up to 96 to 192 kilohertz. This next slide should clarify that a little bit. So sample rate, how often does the device report what it's hearing? You can see analog is always a smooth waveform. And then as we take more and more samples with a digital recorder, we start to approximate that. And then bit depth, can the device understand the difference between this amplitude and this one? So that little difference right there, does it understand that this smooth waveform has infinite amplitudes inside of it, and how does it approximate that? So again, the higher the better. I'll pause again for questions quickly before we go on to audio processing. Sample rate and bit depth gets a little tricky, and if you start reading, audiophile threads on Reddit or something like that, you'll see people talking about 192 kilohertz, but I doubt that your ears can hear a difference between that and like 96 kilohertz. All right, if there are no more questions, let's talk about audio processing. So the basics of EQ, and this is what you would see on that dedicated mixer that we were talking about earlier. All of these frequency bands that you can control individually. Consumer gear that just has low, medium, high, or bass, mid, treble, that's 3-band EQ. But Pro gear will have 20 plus bands that you can control individually. And that just gives you more control over the character of the sound. So you can cancel out problematic frequencies, maybe where you're getting some feedback or some interference. You can boost things like the vocal band, which happens between 100 and 300 hertz. And the entire range of human hearing is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, or 20 to 20. That would be 20 kilohertz at the top end. Adults can't really hear that full range. We lose our hearing over time, obviously, but there is super harmonic frequencies that are coloring the sound up there that we might not be able to hear on their own, but that add character to the sound. So it's important to capture as much of that information as possible. As you say, that too long didn't read. More EQ bands is more control, and you want as much as you can get. So you can see this is some different bands where you might have low end rumble, for instance, 20 to 80 hertz. You can roll that off to get rid of some low end noise. You can see like the air region up here is where some people might not be able to hear those frequencies on their own, but that can add some sparkle and interesting effects to these lower ranges that are actually being heard. So if you just do a Google search, you can find all kinds of these EQ cheat sheets. I find them very helpful. Um, Digital audio workstations are where you're actually going to be editing the sound on your computer. The most common ones, and these three that I've worked with, are Adobe Audition, which is industry standard, super powerful, and very expensive. The one I use the most is GarageBand. For editing the Center for Creativity's podcast, I use GarageBand. Even though it's music focused, it has a lot of capability. And if you have a Mac, it's free. Audacity is a great option, but it has a steep learning curve. It's open source and free, but it's not as user friendly as something like GarageBand or even Audition. And there are many, many others that you can research as well. I'll say Audacity has a really good noise reduction filter, and that's mostly what I use it for. Um, there's, tons and tons and tons, and these are just a few also pretty common ones that I've listed down below, like Avid and Ableton Live. I'm really excited to try out Reaper next. I think that program sounds pretty interesting. It's pretty affordable and has a really small footprint on your computer. It doesn't take up very much space. So I'm excited to try that one out. All right. I don't know if anyone's heard this quote, the best camera is the one you have with you. But it goes for sound as well. The best recorder is the one you have with you. If your fancy gear is sitting under your bed in your apartment, then it isn't going to help you. So things like smartphones, which we have with us all the time, are really capable if you know what their limitations are. So the iPhone, for instance, has a built-in voice memo app, which is great for, kind of doing on the scene, quick recording. There's a lot of additional apps that you can get. Here's a few that I've worked with that can make your smartphone into a really really passable recorder. And then if you get these sort of peripheral microphones that are made to plug into your phone, I mean, you're cooking with gas at that point. You're good to go. On Android, I've used HiQ Recorder and Samsung Voice Recorder that do the same thing. Could definitely recommend everything that you see here. But remember, if you're recording on your phone, to put it in Do Not Disturb mode. You don't want to have your recording stopped by a spam call. Real quick, file formats are divided into lossy and lossless. So lossy files to get smaller files, throw away a lot of extra information that the algorithm thinks is unnecessary, but oftentimes that extra information, just like that higher EQ band, is adding quality to the file. So things like MP3s are discarding all of that information to get a really small file, which is fine for listening to music on your phone, but it's not going to be studio quality, like a lossless file, which retains all of the information and is often not compressed. Most common being WAV files, and that's kind of the recommended file format. It's lossless, uncompressed. The files are huge, but they have all the quality there. And once you start messing with it in the editing, you're not going to be throwing away a bunch of information. MP3s, like I said, are lossy and compressed. M4As is a lossy Apple-specific format. Boo, that's, it's not cross-compatible. I don't like M4As. And FLAC files, you'll see sometimes are compressed, but also lossless. Okay, questions. I see one from Jack. Would you say Pro Tools or Audition is more industry standard? In my experience, which again comes from the film industry and podcasting and these kind of things, I have seen Pro Tools used more. Wait, I'm sorry. Audition. I've seen Audition used more. I don't have experience with Pro Tools myself, but again, these things like Pro Tools, Audition, even Avid and Ableton are super common. And depending on what industry you're kind of working in, those are all pretty standard. When you get into things like Reaper that I mentioned, that's when you get off standard, and it might not be as cross compatible. So again, I would say do your research on what's going to work for you and what's going to fit into your budget and allow you to keep growing without having to buy more software later down the line. Things like Audacity or GarageBand are great to start with because they are free, with the caveat you have to have an Apple computer for GarageBand. But once you start spending a lot of money on software, hopefully you'd be at a place where you know what you want and what you need for the industry you're working in. Laura, for beginners, what's a basic sound device that can be added to a DSLR and or iPhone, especially for documentary style shooting or interviews? Yeah, like I said, the most basic entry-level device that you probably already have is your phone, with some of these free or $3.99 apps that you can add to it. As far as sound devices that can be added to a DSLR, in filmmaking and documentary and these kind of things, your sound system is going to be separate from your camera system. Even though you can plug a microphone into your DSLR, I wouldn't recommend it because a separate recorder, it is a redundancy, but it's also a dedicated piece of equipment that's going to have better quality components than the DSLR, which is meant to take pictures, not record sound primarily. So I would recommend starting with your phone, starting with what you have and what you're going to have on you to practice and practice. Even these peripheral microphones that you can plug into your phone are pretty cheap, pretty reasonably priced, I should say. And they'll get you started. Other things like the H4n from Zoom. It's one of those little handheld recorders that I showed you earlier. Those are great to get started as well. Great for journalism, that kind of thing. What's the best way to record phone interviews for a podcast? Microphone, external recording, or something else? Yeah, recording phone interviews can be a little tricky. I would say that Zoom is a good tool for us in this setting. We're all familiar with Zoom now, and it has built-in recording functions. It can record people separately. So if you can get someone to do a phone interview through Zoom rather than on the phone, that's a great option. You can also set up a free Google Voice account and record your phone calls that way. It's definitely a tricky thing to do for podcasting, and it's something that we at Center for Creativity have been, I'll say, struggling with, but struggling to figure out the best way to accomplish doing podcast interviews remotely. I should have mentioned transom.org, which is a nonprofit focused on education and public radio. They have a lot of information on that kind of thing, like recording mix minus signals for phone calls. So I would check that out. I'm just going to drop the name right there, Transom. They're awesome. I read them like every day. Sweet. Any other questions? If not, we are going to close that, stop the share because it's time. Oh, I should say, here's more from the Center for Creativity. Please stay in touch with us, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Email us at creative.pitt.edu. Our events are listed on our website, creative.pitt.edu. We love to hear from you. Any feedback that you have, workshops you want to see in the future, stay in touch. We're here for you. With that, we're going to stop the screen share and jump into a studio tour. And I'm going to quickly show you what I have in my second bedroom closet. Sorry about the motion sickness, but you can see this is my closet that I have set up for recording. All right, let's come in. Here we are. So, like I said, absorption breaking up that sound reflection is the goal. So being inside of a closet, being in a blanket fort is a great way to record at home. Um, you can you probably can't hear through these headphones, but it's so much quieter in a closet. You can't hear any of the street sounds or anything like that. There's also a lot of mass in here and irregular shapes that are going to break things up. Um, this is just to cover some stuff up, but yeah, hanging up blankets, heavy curtains, these kind of things are super helpful. Um, and you can see right here, this is my main microphone hanging down with like a camera stand in front of me. This is my best microphone, so that's why I use it for podcasting. This is a Rode NTG4 Plus shotgun microphone. So this is what you're going to see on film sets, like up on a boom stand. And it has that really tight polar pattern, so it's going to reject all the sound and just focus right where you point it. This is just a pop filter or a windscreen. Eric has recorded in cars, great acoustics. That's true. Yeah, car doors, like with all the insulation and parts in there, they're really heavy and massive. That's a really good tip as well, as long as there's not like a garbage truck or driving past. um, my other microphones, this is a large diaphragm condenser and it is a USB microphone. I don't have a stand for it, unfortunately, but this is great for podcasting. You can get it really close and hear very quiet sounds. It has a few settings to automatically cancel out some of that low end rumble, that kind of thing. This is a dynamic microphone from Electro Voice that's very similar to the Shure SM58. Maureen, do you always use a windscreen? I do. It doesn't affect the sound. This foam is like very porous, so it's not gonna have any noticeable difference. It's specifically made for that. And if you're in the wind, I would even recommend one of those big furry, they're called dead cats that you put on a microphone, sadly called dead cats. But those are the fur on the outside of those are gonna break up the wind. So it's not going to get into your microphone as much. I always use this. It helps with what are called plosives as well, which are the pops when you say the letter P, and things like that. This is just going to help break that up so you're not clipping in your microphone as much. Yes, the Electro Voice. This microphone is supposed to be the Shure SM58 killer from Electro Voice in like, I don't know, the 60s. Didn't take off as much, but it's very similar vocal microphone. I even have a micro cassette recorder. You know, if you want to get super simple and just get out there and record, like something like this that records automatically when you press the button. And it's fun to play around with the sound of cassettes. Like that's just a fun thing to have. Definitely recommend a good set of headphones as well. If you can't hear your sound in its full quality, you're not going to do a great job editing. So big over-the-ear headphones, these are from Sennheiser, are highly recommended and I think worth their weight in gold. These are just great headphones. I'm going to throw them on the ground. My recorder is Tascam DR680. This is what, 6 inputs, four XLR 1/4-inch combos, and then 2 more 1/4-inch. This is a great recorder, a field recorder that you can put a shoulder strap on and carry with you when you're on a film set. Also works great in the studio. It absolutely demolishes AA batteries. It takes 8 AA batteries, which is crazy. So it's a lot better to have it plugged into the power. In addition to all that stuff, you can get a simple little USB adapter like this that has a headphone and microphone inputs. And I use this to plug my shotgun microphone directly into my computer when I don't want to use the recorder and that kind of thing. That's, you know, $10. That's a great thing to have. this is a, if you can get that to focus, TRRS on this end and a TRS on this end. So this is an adapter that you use with like a microphone cable like this to allow it to plug into your phone. That extra ring, tip ring sleeve, that extra ring is what your phone is using as your microphone. Like if you have headphones that have a built-in microphone like these. So that's crucial if you want to use your phone as a recorder. Some phones you can also do the USB thing. If you have a USB-C to a USB regular adapter. So yeah, that's my basic setup in here. I've got XLR cables all over the place. But I also have Christmas lights that I can turn on and then turn off the overhead light and really get in the zone. Behind me here, you can't see, I have a big piece of foam, like upholstery foam, which helps stop my voice from bouncing back to me in the microphone. But like I said, hanging up blankets and curtains are a great way to do that as well. Are there any questions about where I am or how to set up a home studio yourself? You can drop them in the chat. A lot of, some of my favorite podcasts, they record all through Zoom these days, and that's totally doable. The recommendation I would have is to record yourself like on your phone or on one of these devices separately from your computer, because Zoom does compress all of that information super tiny into very little bandwidth to send it over the internet. So it's not great sound quality. So whenever you can record separately, it's a good idea. Yeah, cool. All right, I think I showed everything in here. This workshop is going to be recorded, or it is being recorded, and will be available on our YouTube channel. And I'll do a little more in-depth, like look around with a camera, and you can reference that all later as well. All right, let's go back out to the desk. Okay. Are there any other questions about anything we've talked about today? I love talking about sound and sound-related things. Yeah, so keep, let's see, someone wanted the QR code again, Jackie. Yeah, our website is just creative.pitt.edu. Our social media is at Center for Creativity on Instagram and at Pitt C4C numeral 4 on Facebook and Twitter, so you can keep in touch with us that way. And again, check out our other media-related programming that's coming up with the Pittsburgh Lens and other sorts of making programming that you can find on our website. We do all kinds of fun things. We are at time, but I did say we were going to play with some Foley. So if anyone needs to leave, like, feel free to do so. For those of you that want to stay around and play with some sound effects, we can do that as well. So Foley, like I said, is the art of creating sound effects to go along with video that's already been recorded. Everything from footsteps to the sounds of lightsabers in Star Wars is Foley. And it can be a really fun thing to play around with, just making little sounds alone in a studio while you watch a movie on repeat. I have collected some objects here, but I encourage you, I'm going to play a silent film, which I believe is from 1920, a Buster Keaton comedy. And I would encourage everybody to look around you and gather up some items that might make cool sound effects to go along with it. Obviously, it's a silent film, so all we have is a music track, and we're going to add in all the sound effects ourselves. Um, and think creatively about it, because the object that you have isn't being seen on screen, so really all the audience it has is the sound that they're hearing. Um, so things like body blows in action movies. There's a sound engineer punching a piece of steak, um, bones breaking, which is classic sound is breaking celery. It's not actual bone; it's vegetables. Or cutting a head of lettuce makes a really really gross sound. So think creatively about the objects and the sounds that they make. I mean, I have things like uh, my leather boots, which I don't know if you can hear that, make good leather sounds, but also footsteps. I've got some sticks and some pieces of wood over here, a hammer. Got this piece of Velcro, which makes a nice ripping sound. Bicycle bell, tape, little buckle that makes nice metal sounds. So, look around you. Anything that makes sound is fair game. So if you are in a room that doesn't have any objects in it, you can also do the Police Academy thing and make sound effects with your mouth if you want. A little Michael Winslow action. Um, I should point out this little guy too. This is a fire engine whistle, which is really fun. I don't know where I got that, but we're going to use it tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share this film, and I'll just let it play us out. And at a certain point, I'll just cut it off, and we'll all go home for the night. So before I do that, I'll say thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. I was very happy to share everything that I know with you, and I hope you have great success in the sound world yourselves. So go forth and listen. And with that, I'll start the film.